All right, let's get started. We are going to do a presentation tonight on COVID-19, what we know so far and planning for the future. For those of you who are new to the presentation, my name is Dr. Valerie Crowder and I'm an emergency medicine physician. I've been practicing emergency medicine now for about 30 years. And this is my fourth pandemic. And I've also worked two category 4 and 5 hurricanes. I have a lot of information in this presentation, and it is on the website www.AskDrV.us. So the original source original source documents and articles are there, the research studies. You can also follow me on Twitter, which is AskDrV. All right, let's get started. The structure is we're going to do a slide presentation for about 15 minutes, and then it's going to be all question and answer. So feel free to ask any question that you might have. What happens basically is that everyone for the presentation is in listen mode only. People put in questions either at the chat or the Q&A. I take the written questions first. And then if we're able to open up the mic and have people ask questions live, I do, but we're not always able to do that. So first we deal with any sort of written questions. You can also email me questions after the presentation is over, and I will change the presentation to actually put some of the information about that in the presentation. All right, the intention is to keep all webinar participants informed with COVID-19 science that will help them and their families stay healthy during the pandemic. The outcome is that you will leave this webinar motivated to create an action plan for yourself and your family. For some people, they're going to be motivated to create an action plan for a broader community. They may actually be involved with a homeowners association or a union, or they may be an employer of a workplace, or they may run a school. So the goal is that people really begin to actually create an action plan. All right, it took us 99 days to reach the first million, 43 days to hit the second million cases, 28 days to reach the third million cases, and the fourth million case came after just 2 weeks. Lastly, the fifth million case came after 17 days. So the infection has been broadening in its scope around the country. So how do you know if you or a family member have COVID-19? So there's 3 ways that you actually know. One is PCR testing, one is antigen testing, and one is by CAT scan. Okay, so I'm going to actually show you what that is. PCR testing is where you see the swabs being put up people's nose. It can be done with a swab through the nose or saliva. It's most accurate 8 days after exposure. If you actually get tested before the 8 days or significantly after the 8 days, you can get what they call a false negative, where the test is negative and you really have COVID-19. The antigen test is what they call the rapid test. That detects proteins on the surface. And that also gives you a false negative about 20 to 30% of the time. So if it's positive, it's really true, but if it's negative, it may not be. So in the medical setting, what we do is we will do 2 tests. If we're concerned that someone actually has COVID, or we want to confirm that they actually are negative, we will do 2 tests, and if we get 2 negative results, then that determines that someone is negative. Now, we sometimes have COVID tests that consistently come back negative, and we still think the person has COVID-19. And for that, we actually then go to a chest CT, and we can diagnose COVID-19 by CAT scan. And on the CAT scan, it looks like a ground glass appearance in the lungs, and that is COVID-19 diagnosis. You can diagnose by those CAT scan findings. So, we all talked about this. Respect COVID-19 is highly contagious. Minimum time of exposure to infect others is 45 seconds. That's why mask wearing is so important. Also, if you get exposed to someone with COVID-19, 60 to 80% of the time you will become positive. That's different from the flu, which is only about 30 to 40% of the time you become positive. There's been a lot of talk about droplet versus airborne. We now know that COVID-19 is both a droplet and an airborne disease. So that's why the initial recommendation was for 3 feet from someone, and now it's 6 feet. And this basically shows just schematically how a larger droplet falls only within 3 feet, whereas an airborne disease can travel much further. I reiterate this over and over again. It's really important if you have a home nebulizer not to use it during the pandemic. You can't tell the difference between an asthma attack and a COVID-19 infection. And if you are COVID-19 positive, you live in a home with other people, you will aerosolize it and spread it throughout the home, and you will infect everyone else that lives there. So if you live by yourself, obviously there's no problems with using a nebulizer, but if you live with other people, it is very important to either use a nebulizer outdoors, on a porch or a deck or in a garage, or you can use an inhaler with a spacer, which delivers the same amount of medication and is shown here in the photo to the right. All right, they have identified 6 clusters of symptoms that predict severity. Now, what's interesting about this is the most consistent symptom of COVID-19 is a loss of taste or smell. That is consistent amongst all 6 of these, and is usually a very early symptom. So you can have like a flu-like symptom with no headache. A flu-like symptoms with no fever. Cluster 2 is flu-like with a fever, where you actually get headache, sore throat, and a fever and a loss of appetite. Then there's also a gastrointestinal version of COVID-19, which basically can almost seem like food poisoning, where you get nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Then you can get flu-like symptoms with fatigue, flu-like symptoms with confusion, and then the 6th cluster is where you have everything all together. Flu-like symptoms, fatigue, confusion, abdominal symptoms, everything all together. So clusters 4, 5, and 6 are the ones that are most likely to get hospitalized, and those are the ones that are most likely to need ICU care, and also the ones that are most likely to die. All right, on Monday, I actually had my COVID-19 article published by NBC. And basically in this article sort of went over some of the checklists and some of the things that people need to actually think about or ask their schools when it comes to school reopening. So let's talk a little bit about the study that I went over in this particular article. So the Lancet Pediatric COVID study is the largest pediatric COVID study done outside of China. It spanned 25 countries and 82 healthcare institutions, and was 582 confirmed COVID cases. The average age of the patients was 5 years old. 75% of the children with COVID had no pre-existing condition. They were healthy children. So I think that's very, very important to emphasize. COVID-19 does impact healthy children. 2/3 of the kids had fever. 1/3 of them did not. 54% of them had URI symptoms, which is more sort of like runny nose, watery eyes. The GI symptoms, about 22% of them had. 28% of them only had a headache. And then 25% of them had what you would think, wheezing, coughing, etc. So this is really important because you can really miss COVID-19 if you're thinking that it is only a respiratory illness. Some of the children had what we call COVID toes. This is COVID-19. We tell parents if they describe this over the phone or they call the emergency department that your child does have COVID, if they have this, and you really don't even need to bring them in for testing unless they're actually having problems. But you should quarantine. But it is a discoloration of the toes that make them look like they might be frostbitten, and they're swollen with a little black and bluish. So what happened with the children? About 2/3 of them required hospitalization, 62%. 8% required ICU admission. 4% required ventilatory support. 3% required medications to support their blood pressure. Their blood pressure was very low. and then 0.7% died. So they found that younger children did not do as well, particularly those that were less than 30 days old. The boys also, there was more deaths among the male children. Children that presented with respiratory symptoms rather than GI symptoms didn't do as well. And also, if there was an additional infection, so for some children, like they had COVID-19 and strep flu, or COVID-19 and influenza, or COVID-19 and RSV, and RSV is a virus that goes around a lot in the wintertime. The most common source of infection was from the parents. 4% of the children did get it from another sibling, so there is child-to-child transmission, and 40% of them didn't know where they got it from. Now, if you happen to become COVID positive, it is really important that you quarantine immediately. It is preferable to do 21 days. I know they're telling people, some places are telling people they only need to quarantine for 10 days or 14 days. After 14 days in Italy, they found that people were still positive. So really, it wasn't until they had people quarantined for 21 days that they actually found that they were not positive. In your quarantine room, you want to have a pulse ox machine. That is just something that you clip onto your finger and actually reads out what your oxygenation saturation is. Anything 95% or higher is good. Anything less than 95%, you would want to go into the emergency department. That's important to have because a lot of people who are short of breath with COVID do not know that they're short of breath. So it's not like a normal disease where you get short of breath and you know you're short of breath. Zinc and vitamin D3 are important things that really make a difference in COVID-19. You want to have access to a bathroom that's only used by you, a cell phone, have people leave food at the door, and open up the windows and make sure there's a HEPA filter in the air in the house, particularly if you share. If there's somebody else living in the home. I always remind people that even though you may be quarantining in the basement, you're still sharing the ventilation of the home. All right, just a little bit on mask. The N95 mask was developed by Peter Tsai, a Taiwanese person that developed the N95 mask, and specifically what he developed was the fabric on the outside of the mask. It is electrostatically charged and attracts particles. So that's why it's very important not to touch the outside of your mask or move it up and down by touching the outside, and instead sort of touch the rubber bands that go around your ear. He recommends 7 masks, 1 for each day of the week. You hang them up after that day is over, and then you rotate them. So a mask sitting for a week would then allow time for any virus to be deactivated. A little bit about the various different types of masks. I know people have asked this question a lot. N95 and KN95 masks are similar. The KN95 mask is a Chinese standard, and the N95 mask is a US standard. Both of them actually, if properly fit tested and worn, actually block out 95% of the particulate matter. N100s and P100 masks are more respiratory, personal respirator-like masks that block out 99.9% of particulate matter. Now, this is really important. You'll see people that have a mask on with a valve versus no valve. It's very important that you use the mask without a valve that is off to the right. Because that the valve actually allows you to expire, and if you're COVID-19 and you're actually breathing out, then you're actually breathing out air that potentially could be COVID-19 positive. This is just the article that came out where CDC actually recommended to not wear a mask with a valve. This is a mask that's coming out that is FDA registered but not yet approved. It's called the Leaf. It's $14.99. There's a waiting list for it. It's an active ventilation with a HEPA filter, and it's clear so we can see each other smile. This is very important for people that read lips, etc. Also, they have neck gaiters. They found that neck gaiters, which are the things that you kind of pull up and pull down, they actually increase the transmission of COVID-19, and they're recommended that people do not use them. So basically, the key points are that you want to really filter as much of the air incoming as possible. If you make a fabric mask at home or something, that you actually use a minimum of 3 layers, but preferably 5. I recommend that men get rid of their facial hair. We don't know if facial hair is maybe one of the reasons why men are more likely to get this disease and more likely not to do well when they get it. They're getting a higher viral load. So I recommend that people get rid of facial hair, and that whatever mask they have has a metal bend piece around the nose. Now, people that ask about a face shield versus a mask, it's very important that a face shield does not provide protection like a mask. So if you're going to wear a face shield, you would wear it in addition to a mask, but not instead of. Now, this just shows what is the probability of transmission depending on who wears the mask. The healthy person is to the right. The COVID-19 carrier is to the left. If the healthy person actually has on the mask, transmission probability is 70%. If the COVID-19 carrier person has on a mask, the transmission probability is 5%. If both people have on a mask, the transmission probability goes down to 1.5%. This is very, very important because you're essentially wearing a mask for other people. They recently did a study. I didn't get a chance to add this into today's presentation on the airlines, and they have found several asymptomatic carriers that flew on planes and then impacted and actually transmitted the virus to others. So that's why it's very important, whether or not you have symptoms or not, that you wear a mask. A lot of people talk about the deaths. This is going to be my next article on COVID-19, but they don't talk about the long-term sequelae. So there is something called post-intensive care syndrome. 75% of COVID patients experience this coming out of the ICU. And basically it is some cognitive, mental, or physical impairment, right? And it's usually the common things are limb amputations, renal failure requiring dialysis, a stroke, pulmonary fibrosis, decreased lung capacity with normal activity like walking or house cleaning. All right, we are all waiting for a vaccine. So I wanted to actually show the vaccine process and where we were, because we actually have a lot of vaccines in the pipeline. The first part of the process is exploratory, where they're just sort of figuring out how the infection works. Preclinical is where they're testing it in animals. Both of those steps for COVID-19 were already done because the coronavirus, the SARS was also a coronavirus. So they started making a vaccine for SARS. And then what happened was when COVID came, that same work could be used. So it was easier to sort of immediately go into a clinical development phase. So there's 3 phases. Phase 1, where you just determine if it's safe. Phase 2, increased number of participants, and usually it's randomized. And then phase 3 is a large study. So right now there are several vaccines that are in phase 3, and they're actually working on getting 30,000 people into the vaccine, into the actual trial. So then there's regulatory review and approval, manufacturing, quality control, and distribution. So if you actually look at where we are right now, there are basically over 150, probably closer to almost 200 vaccines that are in various phases. Now, I last updated this vaccine tracker on August 21st, 2020. Moderna, which is the vaccine that is being produced in the United States, they have 40% of the 30,000 people that they need enrolled into the COVID-19 trial as of August 22nd. Now, what's important about this vaccine is this is a 2-part vaccine. So 40% of the participants have taken the first part of the vaccine. You have to wait 30 days and then take the second part. It's a 2-step vaccine. Then there was also with Yale and NBA, they partnered to do a saliva test, which is like an at-home COVID-19 test called Saliva Direct. It's done with sort of a test strip, almost similar to a test strip that you would use maybe to check your blood sugar. And so that was given emergency authorization by the FDA just about 7 days ago. All right. So right now we've got sort of no church, indoor gyms in Washington, D.C. I have to change this slide. Indoor gyms in Washington, D.C. just opened up, but no movies and no indoor office work for right now. I want to talk briefly about schools. That's really what the article was about. I want to make sure that parents are really empowered to know what zone they're in. The website that I'm going to actually recommend that parents go to actually breaks it down into green, yellow, and orange and red zone. So for the purposes of this conversation, if you see something that says orange, please treat orange and red as similar. But basically, red zones have the highest number of new cases and a diagnostic test positivity rate of 10% or more, which means 100 people were given the test and 10 of them actually came back positive. Yellow is 10 to 100 per 100,000 with a test positivity rate of 5 to 10%, and green zone is less than 10 with a diagnostic test positivity rate of less than 5%. There's a lot of things to really consider. If you want to see the full report, the American Academy of Pediatrics did a report, and they actually broke it into all of these different areas, looking at students with disabilities, special populations, athletics, mental health, group size, classroom size, etc. The place to go to actually get your infection rate is covidactnow.org. That website allows you to click your state, and then you can actually see the various counties. So other things to consider before going back to school is the age of your children. Do your kids understand the importance of wearing a mask? Can they keep a mask on all day? And also, are you living in a multi-generational household? Do you live with a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or someone who has some either disabilities or some medical illnesses? This is actually what the website actually looks like. Like I said, I would treat orange as red. So orange and red, for the purposes of what to do, I would count those as equal. So in other countries, once they've decreased the community infection rate, then they've been able to bring back schools. So you've seen some schools open and then close because the community infection rate was not as low as it needed to be. So once the community infection rate is low, then you still have things to do, like decrease the class size, move desks 6 feet apart, get rid of public water fountains, provide PPE for students, teachers and administrators, clean the rooms and buses more frequently, install cleaning stations, and do temperature testing. This is a COVID risk chart that was put together by the Texas AMA. And this basically goes over, what are the highest risk things that we, as I say, used to do. And the highest risk things really are going to a music concert, going to a religious service, particularly if they're singing with a chorus or a choir, going to a bar, eating at a buffet. Less risky is like a 6 is going to work in an office or sending your kids to school or camp or daycare. They put a 5 at shopping at the mall or attending a backyard barbecue. 4 is staying in a hotel for 2 nights, going to a library or museum. 3 is grocery shopping or going for a walk or run or playing golf. 2 is pumping gas or playing tennis. And 1 is opening your mail at home. All righty, we're gonna actually switch back over now to Q&A.